Hello, welcome back to this channel. After several weeks of pause on my end, I'm finally back for a few videos. Just so you know, there's just been a lot going on in my life because I am coming towards the end of my degree and I'm starting to get ready for oral exams, and it's all pretty big project. So yeah, I've just been AWOL for a while, and I probably will be uploading irregularly on this channel, but I'm still reading on the side and I still love filming these wrap-ups. So you're going to see these every once in a while. You'll see a tag every once in a while, and I hope you'll enjoy these videos even if they are coming to you irregularly. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So I'm going to do my July and August wrap up together. I haven't been reading as much as before, and in September I really didn't read much. I don't think I'll have a special September wrap up, but I'm going to talk about a few of the books that I did read in July and August. The first book on my list is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. And this was on the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction 2021. And that's also why I picked it up, because I just wanted to read a few that were on that list. And I have to say, this was a really weird book. So this is basically a book about internet culture, and I actually appreciate that the author knows about internet culture. You really get the feeling that she actually does use the internet as a normal person. And because of that, this book was also really funny. I just thought all of the references were funny, and the internet logic that we kind of use in our daily lives was pretty funny, and that was well reflected in this book. So kudos to actually reflecting internet culture in a book. I've never seen that before. But it was weird in the sense that this is not like traditional prose, so you don't have like a normal text that you're reading, like a normal story that you're reading, but it's more like tons of Twitter thoughts after another that if you read them together kind of makes sense as a story. And that's just not my style. I just didn't really enjoy that. So the first part of the book is very much like that. We kind of get to know the main character of the book, and she earns her living on the internet, which she calls the portal. And then the second part of the book, there's a major event that happens in her life that brings in tons of grief, so it's a very difficult event. And then seeing how she deals with that, and she gets ripped away from the internet, and how she deals with real life, even though so much of her life was online, was really interesting. So I actually enjoyed the second part of the book way more than the first. But altogether, I found it a little weird, but it was very funny. I have to say that. It really was funny and very enjoyable in that sense. So I don't know if this is going to be your cup of tea. I would recommend just reading into it and seeing if you would enjoy reading it. So the next book on my list is A Concise Chinese English Dictionary for Lovers by Xiaolo Guo. And I thought this book was so cool. This was a book recommendation from the New York Review of Books, and I found this in there and it sounded really intriguing. So basically, Jiyoung, who is a Chinese immigrant, and she moves to England in order to learn English for a year. So when she arrives in England, her English is not very good. She can speak very, very basic English, but not complicated sentences. And this is basically her diary. So once she lands, her English is really basic. She uses really short sentences to describe things, and then she meets an English man and she moves in with him as well. So this story reflects their relationship and how it comes together and what difficulties they have. But in the progression of the book, we also see how her language improves. And this was actually really fascinating because more of her character could shine through in the actual language, because she's going from such basic language to way more complicated English languages and full sentences. So we can see her character way more clearly at the end of the book than we can at the beginning of the book. What I also really liked is her showing the cultural differences between China and England. And I guess you could use England as like a representative for Western cultures also, because they are more similar, at least, than to Eastern cultures. And I just love this, because as a bicultural and bilingual person that did grow up between two cultures, this was just an absolute enjoyable read. So for me, this was an absolute 5-star, because I thought the author really grasped how to, I don't know, how to show those little intricacies of like what the differences are like in cultures and what they're not like. So I found this super fascinating. If you're interested in like bicultural stuff as well, this is absolute recommend. The next book over here is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I finally got around to reading this, and I don't know, it seemed like people either hate or love it, and I'm kind of just meh about it. So I don't know, I also find it really difficult when the author doesn't clearly mark dialogue in a page. I just don't like it that much. It's just a little more difficult to read. Once I got over that, it was a fairly enjoyable story. So it's about two people who meet in high school basically and kind of like circle around each other for their lives, and they're kind of involved, and then they're friends again, and then they get involved again. And what I did like about this book is that it really reflected the way lives sometimes weave together and then also like fall apart and then find each other again. So I really liked that aspect of this book. I found that to be very real. It felt like real at some points. But I didn't really like either of the characters. I wasn't rooting for them necessarily. And I don't know, I just thought it was, I don't know, I didn't really like them. So I never really built a big emotional connection to the two. And I was never really rooting for them or against them. So I was kind of indifferent about the ending and the way what happened in the end. So it wasn't okay. I think I would put this as like a 3-star read. It was certainly entertaining, but it wasn't like the best and the creme de la creme of something that I've read. So the next read that I did read was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I really enjoyed this book. This was such a great summer read. I read this in July, and it was the perfect thing to like read at the beginning of the summer season because it's tons of beaches and surfing and all the stuff that I would never do in my real life because I'm not really interested in surfing, but it was fun to read about that. And this book was also in the same world as The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I had just read, and I absolutely loved that book. So it was kind of fun to see the references between the two of these books, and you wouldn't notice them, so they're not exclusive references, but if you know the other book, you know. So that was kind of fun. And this book explores like family ties and dealing with like image to the outside and what you actually feel like as a person, and the way family dynamics can, I don't know, shape a person and shape different lives. So I thought that was done really, really well. And what I really just love about Taylor Jenkins Reid is that she just has such a knack for making characters really feel really real. So I really did feel like some of these characters were real people, or I was reading about real lives. So that was actually really interesting, and that's why, I don't know, I enjoy these books so much because I really feel for the people in them. And one of the main characters, I think her name is Nina, it's been a while already, and I just absolutely loved her to bits and was rooting for these people and just hoping that they could find closure in some way. And somehow they did. That's what made it a fun summer read, because it basically all went well. But it was just, yeah, it was an enjoyable read, and the writing also was so good. There are some passages in here that I just loved and that really expressed like situations that we all know. So for example, this is like an argument between the two parents, and they keep arguing. And so here we have, and because June had not shrugged off his arm, Mick felt confident enough to kiss her neck. So they're obviously angry at each other. And because she had not shrugged off the small request, she did not know how to shrug off the larger one. And on it went. Small boundaries broken, snapped like tiny twigs, so many that June barely noticed he was coming for the whole tree. And I don't know, I thought that was such a perfect description of what some relationships can be like that we maybe shouldn't be in, like toxic relationships, or like the other person can take. Just keeps taking smaller and smaller steps towards something that's not good in the whole, that we would have said no to, but because the steps are so small, we can't really say no anymore. And I don't know. So there were little moments and little quotes in here that I just absolutely loved. So this was a 4-star read for me. I enjoyed it. Next on my pile over here is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is a memoir, so I am not going to rate it, but man, if there is a memoir out there that you should read, this is certainly the memoir. And so Yeon-mi Park actually was born in North Korea, and she fled from North Korea into China and then eventually made her way to South Korea and now the United States. And this is basically the story of how she grew up, how she fled, and also what happened to her when she went to China, because I think a lot of us think, well, once you've made it out of a bad situation, like living in North Korea, basically, you know, your life immediately gets better. But a lot of people try to exploit people who were desperate and have fled from situations like that. And she also shows a lot about that reality. And this was just powerful and amazing on so many ways. Number one, it was really interesting to hear about what life in North Korea is like, what it's like growing up there, and why people are so desperate nowadays, why it used to work, and just the things they kind of had to do to survive. And it's just like, but then on the other hand, it was also kind of sad to hear how many people tried to exploit the situation, especially women. So you can kind of imagine that this goes into a not so good situation, especially for women. So this is a big recommend. If you haven't read this yet, I highly recommend that you pick up this book and read it as soon as you possibly can, because it was just amazing. Right afterwards, because I thought it went with the theme, I read Kim Jiyoung, born 1982. This is a book about South Korea, and especially about a woman named Kim Jiyoung that was born in South Korea and that grows up in South Korea, and that kind of goes a little crazy from all the expectation that she has as a woman in South Korea. And so I thought that was interesting, because I just read this book about North Korea, but that doesn't necessarily mean that South Korea or other Western societies or more Western societies are guilt-free, of course. No, we're not. This book really highlighted the way women are treated in South Korea and the ways that they're marginalized and the ways that they're discriminated against in like these really tiny, small ways. So sometimes it's just expectations by society, sometimes it's just that they get overlooked for a promotion. So different things in life that can happen to a woman, but that eventually kind of makes some of them crack just a little bit. And so I thought this book was really well written. It was very simple. It's a very fast read. As you can see, it's really thin, so it's more of like a chronicle of a life. And I loved the twist at the end, and it kind of made me laugh out loud, especially at the very end. So what the person concludes that wrote this book, basically, it had me laughing because it was so ironic. And I kind of like little twists like that. So this wasn't like a literature masterpiece, but it was a really interesting reflection of South Korean society and also of our society, because yeah, we as women still do have some issues when trying to have a career and whatnot. So the next book over here is Transcendent Kingdom by Yagiazi, and this book is also on the short list for Women's Prize for Fiction, something like that, the one that I just mentioned. So I also wanted to give it a read, and I saw it on Book of the Month and bought it from them, and holy, this book like had me from like the first chapter. I was just like, oh my god, this is the book. Transcendent Kingdom is written from the perspective of Gifty, and she is a second-generation immigrant from Ghana, and now actually is a PhD candidate in neuroscience. And her mother is depressed, and her mother was basically sent to her home, to live with her because her mother can't take care of herself because of the depression. And then in this time, she starts reflecting like her childhood and everything she's gone through. And she really starts reflecting her status as an immigrant and what she's gone through, as well as like her brother's addiction. And there are so many themes in this book, but they're all well handled. So a few months ago, I read a book that also had tons of themes in it, but I didn't feel like one was really like pulled together, that they didn't really make sense and they kind of weren't reflected well. But this book just did an amazing job of it. And I wrote down all of the themes that are in this book. So addiction, science versus religion, which is interesting to me as a scientist, the double standard of religious peoples, education, institutionalized racism, depression, and generational trauma, and all wrapped up neatly in like this story of this person like walking around. And it was just done so well. I appreciated so many of these thoughts, and I definitely will be rereading this book because I think I won't grasp everything fully until I've read it like 2 or 3 times, because it was just done so well and the writing was so good that I was just like going through it like really fast because I just enjoyed it so much. So absolute recommendation, especially if you enjoy things like immigration and generational trauma and all of these things, because I find that very fascinating and such a good book. What I also really appreciated, as a side note, from my perspective as a person that does work in a lab, Yagiyazi obviously did talk to scientists and actually looked into a lab, because the descriptions were very accurate, the descriptions of the PhD program, as well as the experiments that Gifty was doing in this novel. So that was a really nice surprise reading this book, because usually I do read books about lab and I'm like, that's not really the way it's done, but okay. But this was actually very accurate, so I really enjoyed that as well. The Death of Vivek Oji is also on my list today, and I really liked this book, but it was a bit too short for my taste. Vivek in this book undergoes basically a transformation as a person, and I thought this transformation was described beautifully. So I really loved that aspect of the book, and I think that is also the aspect that I would have liked to have read more about. I would have really liked to found out more about Vivek and how he was feeling and how he, I don't know, started seeing life and what he went through and how he kind of found the inner peace that he eventually did find. Yeah, I don't know, the way this person was described, this Vivek was described, was just beautifully done, and it felt really humane and gorgeous to watch that transformation. So that was actually really pretty. But yeah, it was a little too short, and I would have liked to have found out more about Vivek himself, because I think that would have been really interesting. But this book definitely did trigger the feels, and I think that's what the author definitely wanted. So this is definitely a big recommendation of mine. The last book I have over here is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. Still don't really know what to think of this book. I certainly enjoyed it, so I can say that. It was a very entertaining and very enjoyable book, and it talked a lot about like being privileged and not really being an ally, even though you think you're being an ally. And I love the way that the dynamics of this whole thing unfolded, and I feel like most of the characters had their own little thing to carry in this whole situation. They all had their own little baggage, and they all kind of made the situation worse in their own little individual way, and I thought that was really cool to see, because like everyone just did something shit. I didn't really like any of the characters in the book, which I found interesting. I usually do like someone, but I never really liked any of the people. But it was just kind of funny to see them get at it and to just see the whole thing escalate. I was just laughing at the end. So it was definitely a very entertaining read, and also a read that every once in a while made me think, oh, maybe there are some things I can learn from this as well. Yeah, I recommend this to anyone, especially about like the allyship situation, and having that put into an entertaining story that you enjoy reading was just a really cool combination, because I feel like a lot of books about racism and institutionalized racism can be very heavy. Like Transcendent Kingdom, that was a very heavy book in my opinion, but this was kind of not lighthearted, but it was more action-packed, let's put it that way. There were more things happening, so that took away from the heaviness of the subject, but while still acknowledging how heavy the subject itself is. This is really hard to explain, but a great book nonetheless. Really enjoyed it. I think this is like a 5-star because I enjoyed it so much. And I hope you will too. Those are all of the books that I read in July and August. Like I said, in September, I'm not really reading that much because, I was on vacation and I wanted to enjoy my time. And I've just been having a very busy life, which we just have every once in a while. So I hope that you're doing well. I hope that I will see you soon. I'm going to see you as soon as possible. As soon as I have some time to film, I will come back. I promise. It's just going to be irregular from here on out until probably the end of my degree, and I hope you have the patience to stick with me. So I hope you're having a really, really great day. Say hello in the comments if you'd like to, and I also now have an Instagram account that is just for this YouTube, and I plan to show what I'm actually reading on that Instagram, so if you want to stay updated, that's probably the place to go. I will see you as soon as possible. Bye!